Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Chef on Chef, Enabling Culture Through Automation. My name is Jamie Bright, and I work on the marketing team here at Chef. And I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Jessica DeVita, Elizondo, and Seth Thomas. But before we get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping items to cover quickly. A recording of this webinar will be available on demand after the live session, accessible through the same link you're using now. And we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. Our speakers will be answering questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to send those along at any time using the Ask a Question tab in your viewer. And under the Attachments tab, you'll find a link to additional resources for this topic. For those of you that are just joining us, welcome to today's presentation, Enabling Culture Through Automation, presented by Jessica DeVita, Elizondo, and Seth Thomas. Let's go ahead and get started. Jessica, why don't you kick us off by telling us a bit about yourself and what we'll be covering here today?
You bet. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Jessica DeVita. I'm a technical evangelist here at Chef Software. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Elizondo, a solutions architect here at Chef, and Seth Thomas, technical evangelist here at Chef as well. Hey, guys, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
You bet, you bet. Well, so I'd like to introduce, first of all, our agenda for today. I'm going to be introducing the Chef on Chef webinar series. We are going to be highlighting some of the amazing things being built at Chef by chefs using Chef and other non-chef tools. We're going to show how we solve some very specific problems and really ate all the dog food. So in this edition, we're going to be talking about a really great project affectionately called Wombat. We're going to be sharing what we've learned about bringing different groups together to create a product that everyone can use. You're going to see how we leverage test-driven development methods. And again, really, it's important to dog food your products and our own tools. And so we're super excited to share this project with you, share how it's evolving, and ultimately, help you understand why it's important to implement testing pipelines early. We'll talk about retrospectives and a future state, and of course, we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So many of you, if you're familiar with Chef, you'll know our vision is that the most enduring and transformative companies use Chef to become fast, efficient, and innovative software-driven organizations. And let's talk about an example of how we embody this vision at Chef, and that's our series, our webinar for today. Because these DevOps transformations are challenging, make no mistake, and Chef is not immune to these challenges. So let's talk about those and dive right in. Our challenge at Chef, and I want to talk with Seth and Andre about this, is to, let's take a look at some of the problems we were facing as it relates to repeatable builds. And how did that manifest for you? Seth?
Yeah, so for us, there were two, so my name's Seth Thomas, I'm a technical evangelist at Chef, and one of the kind of struggles that we had, leading up to the creation of Wombat had been just something, that seems as simple as reproducible demos for our clients, partners, customers. And we were, this is a big kind of pain point for us because we were doing things like hand cutting AMIs and things that we knew, in our kind of DevOps hearts wasn't exactly the right way, but we had made that sacrifice of we needed something now versus being able to invest the effort. And every company and every team always comes to these decisions. So that was, kind of a motivating factor, and we had been, kind of thinking about for a while. And then the big motivator for us was ChefConf. With ChefConf kind of coming up, we knew that we were going to release some new products and some new things, and we needed the same kind of security and kind of, works right out of the box that we needed for these demos because we wanted to build a demo for ChefConf. And obviously, for anyone who's built demos for keynotes or anything like that, you really want something that is going to work, 100% of the time. And you want to make sure that, with that goal in mind, you want to build something very, very robust and very simple. And those are kind of the motivations for us to go down the path and create Wombat.
Well, and you just, I just want to echo what you said, because if you've done a lot of live presentation, a live demo, the demo gods, they love causing demo fails at the worst time. And so for you to prepare Wombat to serve this purpose, you needed to be 100% confident that it was going to work when the big day came, and it certainly went very well. So I would love to know, let's dig a little more into Wombat. So I just want to say that you mentioned this notion of various teams that you were trying to help them create repeatable builds for their presentations and whatnot. Could we talk a little bit about what kind of work had been done prior to Wombat to address these kinds of problems of repeatable builds?
Yeah, and that's something we're keen to point out when we talk to people about Wombat, is that Wombat is certainly not anything, we don't consider anything supremely novel. We're actually standing on the shoulders of a lot of our colleagues who had made passes at this prior. And so I believe from the solutions architecture group, we had maybe 2 or 3, kind of big iterations on things like this, as well as from our training groups, for everyone who's used the Learn Chef resources. All the Learn Chef resources, we need, very repeatable builds, and we need to be able to track versions very carefully. And this kind of gets to, it's almost kind of a meta integration testing. And so between Andre and myself and several others in the company who weren't able to join us for this webcast, we'd kind of seen this commonly across several groups. And a lot of us had worked in either sales engineering, evangelism, or training, and kind of had seen this very common need and really wanted to address it with something, because it was more than just the product teams.
Right, and most of us have, or a lot of us at Chef have been in different roles, and certainly have seen the various efforts to address this problem, and they were all pretty remarkable, valiant efforts. And again, this is, I think, a challenge that a lot of our audience is probably facing, and this is what we're trying to address as a company. So taking that to the next step, I guess the solution was born, right? Wombat, and here we are with Wombat. And I just want to make one side comment, is that naming things is hard, and when you name things, just beware that if your project is successful, that name will stick around. And so I actually love it. So Wombat came into play here, and really, again, the focus was to remove the replication of work that was happening in the different silos across different teams. And so with Wombat, let's take a little bit of step back about, I want to go back into, the drivers for the demo that needed to happen at ChefConf. How is Wombat able to solve for these things? So Seth, could you talk a little bit about what we needed to demo at ChefConf? We had our VP of engineering and engineering manager live on stage, to 1,500 folks in the audience. What did they need to demo?
So the big thing was, for anyone who's familiar with the announcements at ChefConf, is we released Chef Automate. And Chef Automate is kind of our latest iteration of our commercial offering. It takes a lot of products that you already know and love, both open source and commercial, and kind of puts them under one nice kind of umbrella. So you have your Chef Automate, which has workflow, you may have formerly known as delivery, visibility, so a kind of nice dashboard to see all these changes flowing through, as well as compliance, which is built heavily on the open source InSpec, which we just did a 1.0 release for. And so the challenge here for us was the company was still building these products, right up to the conference, but we also needed very, very, very stable integration testing frameworks that were kind of between the products. And so when you have a lot of small teams sprinting and doing features, there's always going to be some little integration that falls through the cracks or something. And so what we were trying to do with Wombat was, so we could know exactly, as we got information from the teams, just kind of, increment versions and push the entire stack through, and not just, we weren't just focusing on, say, Chef Server or each individual piece. It was more the holistic. Does this all work? Does this all connect together? And is this an experience that anybody could pick up, run through the build and have a working automated environment? And that was kind of the goal. Was if you had absolutely nothing, no certificates, no keys generated or anything, you could go from zero to full automated environment in minutes.
That's amazing. I feel like this really finally brings the power of Chef's tools, open source tools, into a level that people can really see the value from, with the visibility and workflow, as you mentioned. And so, everybody's really familiar with Chef. That's the tool that people know and love for infrastructure automation. But it's exciting to see you creating a product that brings this entire stack together, allows for updates as features come in hot. This is continuous delivery, and this incredible testing framework to prove the whole stack is pretty awesome to see. And so I just want to show a quick slide of Chef Automate, really being able to see at a broad strokes what the state of your fleet is, being able to drill down into failed converges, being able to drill down and look into the state of compliance. We talk about with InSpec, you have compliance as code. And this is the power of being able to see at a moment's notice the absolute state of your compliance. So this is what we needed to show and deliver for production use at ChefConf. So very cool to see. So Seth and Andre, I guess next, again, enter Wombat. Tell us about the tool itself. What is Wombat? What's it made up? What's its intention? How does it work?
Sure, I can take that one. And what's funny is that Wombat actually just started as a bunch of shell scripts that I created a repo for in GitHub, and I couldn't think of a name, so Wombat ended up kind of being the name. And one of the learnings out of this project was actually that naming servers are hard, but actually naming open source projects is even harder. And so, basically what we were trying to do is create something that we knew was a repeatable build, but then also something that, it was kind of removing the boilerplate for a lot of other projects to be able to build their specific content on top of a kind of a minimum viable stack, right? So I think that was kind of our biggest initial intention with the project, and it kind of morphed a little bit over time to make it a little bit more expandable, make it a little easier to use. I'm sure, Seth, you could probably add a ton more there that we initially designed it for.
Yeah, and when we were building this, it was very much I kind of refer to it as a bumper bowling experience. We wanted to give you, as the user, all of the entire stack set up and as kind of unopinionated as possible, but allow you to then opinionate it further. But when we started, like Andre said, this was just shell scripts. We were proving that this was a valuable thing, and once we started to get some value out of it, the first thing we did, we knew that we were going to need to, do things like write tests and all of those things. But that first push for minimum viable product was basically to make sure we weren't reinventing the wheel. Obviously, that's something. I think that's something that as software engineers we're often far too apt to do. But that's also something with our experience. We were like, let's make sure we don't actually need to build something if we don't need to build something. And so this just proved the value and also got some traction from other teams. And then once we had that, we could kind of go on to taking some of this aggregated tribal knowledge from all these teams and actually putting it into a useful thing that everyone could benefit from.
Well, and so it sounds like, every great project starts with, the first line of code and or comment. And so it's interesting for me to have watched, the evolution of Wombat, from that first hack day, stitching together a bunch of shell scripts, like it was great. So, so I guess now, looking at it now, and we see where it's gone from MVP to, to a much more mature product. I guess, what were some of the design tenets that came clear to you as you were, as the product matured? what were kind of the guiding principles and goals for you?
So with Wombat, I think one of the, I mean, I kind of already alluded to we definitely didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we wanted Wombat to be very, very thin, basically as thin as possible. The ideal was that, we are able to make changes to the products that we are configuring or the ecosystem so we can make this entire experience easier in the future. But I think the big one that I even have written down in a notebook, and one of the design goals was coordination without coordination, which is to say we had started off and we had experimented with some frameworks to kind of make this all dynamic. So we'd spin up all of these nodes, have them run Chef, and then have them do runtime coordination with each other. And for folks who've done demos before, know that that's asking for a disaster. You can pull it off a lot of times and it can work. But in our experience, this wasn't giving us the stability we needed. We wanted something more akin to a build artifact. And so you kind of had this perfect snapshot. And so in the design, one of the design goals was to make everything look like it had done all the runtime coordination, but basically have each of these images that we were baking. So think AMIs. These images that we were baking would each be self-contained. So for example, if there was a node that needed to be connected to the Chef server, we would actually pre-create that node on the Chef server when we're setting up the Chef server. It would never actually talk to the node until you brought that entire stack up. But it would already know the node and all the keys were pre-exchanged. And the idea, again, behind this was we wanted to give this to somebody with, potentially zero systems knowledge, zero AWS, or even, whichever cloud you were picking knowledge, and you would be able to get going very easily. After that, we had a few big ones. So we wanted to be able to, like was mentioned earlier, abstract a lot of the boilerplate. So we're using several open source projects in Wombat and leaning heavily on them. So Packer is a big one. We're using Test Kitchen for our testing and verification, and as well as making sure that all these things happen in each of the clouds as they should. We also, one of the things we were trying to get away from was, I mentioned we were cutting AMI by hand, and we knew this was wrong, and so we wanted to be able to really live our mantra of infrastructure as code with regard to to building these. So putting in testing very early on was kind of if you can't build this on your machine, if there's any magic that has to happen elsewhere, it's not it doesn't really fit in Wombat. And I think the biggest one and the kind of final point that I'll leave with the design was we had seen a lot of these happen at Chef, and for a variety of reasons, some of them were they were in private repos, and there was always the question, well, should we open it up public? And that always turned into a little bit of a bike shed as to whether it made sense, was it clean with credentials, and so it's kind of, and Andre and I had seen this several times, and not just at Chef, at several companies, and we're kind of seeing them, we're like, if we just make it open source from the beginning, that forces us to, one, make sure we never commit credentials to the repo, which is probably a good thing. But as well, it kind of forced us to do it all out in the open, and we were building for products that were unreleased without, revealing them, but still kind of having very useful primitives for automating them.
And it seems like you throughout the project, and especially as you open source, made that decision to open source it, a huge part of that was being able to continuously iterate on that, and not just you be able to iterate on it, but again, open that up for other teams. So can you actually talk with us a little more about the decision to open source? How did that change the dynamic of the project and just your interaction with teams? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I think, the biggest thing on this one was not only did we have this intent for internal customers at Chef to use it, right? So like sales, for Learn Chef to use it, for training to use it. But I think both Seth and I have been in the role where we were really trying to enable our partners and other people who wanted to see, what does the Chef story actually look like without having to recreate it every single time I wanted to show it, right? And so being able to have that early intent of keeping it open source allowed us to really kind of evangelize this to other partners and really, keep them in mind when building these kind of expandability features inside of the project itself. I think that was a big early decision that we made.
Yeah, to kind of follow Andre up there just a little bit, that we had been in front of partners often, and they had asked us, hey, can we have this cool demo you just showed us? And oftentimes it was, well, sure, if we copy these AMIs, and this is to say this wasn't a very scalable process, and that was the motivation, is that we realized this, we could give it one-offs, and we kind of found ourselves doing so many one-offs that made sense to try and see if we could build something that actually served all those parties, as an underlying framework.
Well, and so I love this comment from XKCD around standards, and so it reminds me about, the early iterations, the pre-wombats, and your decision to really try to make sure you weren't building yet another silo, and having these, competing sets of tools that were all intended to solve the same issue. So it was great to see that too. And I would say too that, you talked about, partners coming up as a customer. Let's now talk about what some of the early customers were. I know we know about ChefConf, that was an early customer, but I think you had another early customer too in the Learn Chef team. So could you tell us about what that was experience like working with those early customers? The interaction, how you collaborated with those early customers.
Yeah, so a lot of credit for how Wombat came to be is kind of credit to, one, the kind of push of ChefConf, but two, the efforts of our kind of master of disaster at Learn Chef, Thomas Petchel, and so he was building he needed the exact same kind of demo framework that we were building for the keynote, so that we could then deliver on day one the same demo that you saw on the keynote stage. You could then run through yourself, and it was identical. Same bits. These are born from the same Wombat code, and so we realized that. So he was a very early ally and kind of ran through. He's actually running through the content. We were busy building kind of the framework, and so his input there on. These things didn't work. A lot of times, Andre and I were busy. We were like, oh, it builds, but we weren't necessarily going through the entire QA phase of spinning up the stack and making sure it was working, just because of our, the frenetic pace leading up to the event. So that Learn Chef was an absolutely critical customer, and that also forced us to think about things like, how do we deliver license keys? How do we pass those around to some of the harder problems of how do you distribute this? That input and those kinds of requirements were incredibly valuable in shaping the early development of Wombat.
Well, and I can see such a great value to our customers to have the same experience. When they get when they see a demo, they're going to have the same experience, and that parity of experience, I think, is important for people. So I'm really excited to see that come together. Yeah, and Learn Chef, by the way, for folks online with us, it's just such a tremendous resource. You can do it in your own time, at your own pace. You've got 5 minutes here. You've got 15 minutes here. We spin up all the infrastructure for you. It's just a tremendous resource. So please bookmark learn.chef.io. We're big fans of it. So tell me a bit about partners, because I can completely see the use case here for Learn Chef and for the ChefConf, and of course for the sales teams and really anyone at Chef. But partners, tell me about that. We have a great partner program, certified cookbook program. So how is that partner sharing going with Wombat?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our kind of early inspiration for it was from Andre and I's dealings with partners. Formerly, I was on the partner engineering team, and then later on the partner evangelism team. So partners were very near and dear to my heart, because they were the ones asking for things so that they could help sell Chef. And obviously, it was my role there to help them sell Chef more effectively. But for us, as we were building this partner program out, the reasons that we were building this partner program were that, Chef isn't a massive, Chef doesn't have, 16,000 employees across the globe. Our partners are absolutely critical to growing our ecosystem, as well as fueling the love of Chef. And so we had got a lot of them really excited, and they were like, hey, how can I show all this stuff together? And we were like, oh, well, here's this closed repo maybe, and we would maybe cut them a snapshot or something. And so we felt like we were definitely underserving them. So they were almost our shadow customer from the beginning, because that's really what inspired is we wanted to get to that point. And so we've had partners come along, and now they're opening issues on the GitHub repo. We're talking to them in our partner Slack channels, so that they can more effectively sell the story. They don't have to worry about the info or anything. They just need to, we can deliver them, here's a set of content, and here's a framework, and off you go. You should be able to spin it up in 5 minutes, and if it's harder than that, then that's something that we consider a bug.
So that 5-minute metric is important. So at the beginning of a project, it's important to start thinking about, what metric matters. Obviously we need to measure multiple things, but what's the first thing that comes to mind that you need to care deeply about, and how you'll know if you're on the right track or not? These kinds of projects, ultimately they're experiments, they're hypotheses that we want to test. And so it's important to think about how you'll know if something's amiss. And so seeing partners be able to consume this, and that's a great signal. I love that. You had another kind of surprise customer, right, in the training team, and would love to hear any more comments about that.
Yes. So with the training team, it was very similar to what I had personally seen with the partners. I had been involved in delivering a training class, and setting up the infrastructure. We were at the time using a particular service to do this, and it was one of those services where we kind of made that bet of, well, it looks like it's probably worth it for us to pay for it and not build this service out ourselves. But as time went on, we realized that the costs, were a little bit prohibitive, and we realized we could do a lot more, and we wanted to demo more complex frameworks and multiple node workstations, or multiple node clusters to customers, and in these training classes. And so along comes training, and we had seen some of these. Like I said, some of these pain points in trying to build this in training. I remember very vividly working on a project about a year and a half ago, trying to basically build what Wombat was. So there were several failed passes on my own part, as well as several other folks, to kind of get to where we were. And so training had very, very similar needs to the demo. We want to give students a workstation. We want that workstation to be pre-configured. If anyone's sat there and done a class, and you're teaching Chef, the last thing you want to have to do is, oh, well, in order to do this, you must install this other tool, and then to make this work, you need to install this other tool, and you spend a good half the day just with tool installation. That's something that, as we were trying to reduce friction there and get more training content, we realized that building all these things out ahead of time was the best way. You didn't have to worry about accounts. The administrators could easily check in on students' machines, could even run audit checks against these student machines to make sure that they hadn't, accidentally broken anything. And if something went wrong, we could easily spin up a new image. And so those were kind of those were goals and requirements that we got from training that influenced Wombat. The biggest one being the allowance for multiple workstations, because when we designed this, we'd only assumed one person, evaluating. But then with the class, we realized that you're going to have several students using the same automate instance, but you'll need multiple workstations. So those kinds of, that early input helped us to, build something specific, but kind of build in, primitives so that it would help us later.
Well, and I have to say too, I remember the first chef class I took. Literally, you did lose a half a day. It was 11 a.m. before, I got absolutely roadblocked by, Noko Giri, and I think a lot of people have that challenge. We want to make that startup experience, so much better for folks. So that's great. Well, at this point, I guess I'd love to think about, we've been talking about the lessons learned throughout, but as we think about a retrospective, I would love to understand a little bit better about where things felt like they went wrong, that how did you know you needed to make a change. Would love to know more of the stories of this from your perspective. We know that success is not a linear path. So, how we're human at Chef too. So thinking back about it, what were your reflections?
So I guess a lot of it for me was very, very careful tool choice, and making sure we had some familiarity with the tools. And that was, I think, if we hadn't been so familiar with all of the other, with doing this several times with these tool sets and knowing that they could meet those requirements, I think those very, very early days where we were doing the MVP, where we were just doing shell scripts and proving that out, we were also proving out the tools that we were going to use, even though you kind of made the workflow a bit more elegant. We definitely wanted to, like I said, we built these static solutions in the past. And so we kind of had that eye for, let's make sure we build something that actually has value and won't immediately bit rot once we put it out there. And so that kind of developing that MVP and making sure that took off was huge. And I think Andre has something he'd like to add.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing too, as far as working with other teams, was really gaining their trust, right? So it really making those early design decisions to make it really stable. The static image idea was something that, it was a really good idea from the very beginning as far as avoiding that coordination. But, as far as gaining the trust of other teams, right, like we've had, especially the solutions architect team, they've had a ton of experience building this before, building their own kind of framework to try and do this. And, as soon as you get an experience like, you're trying to demo on stage and your demo completely fails, well, you're probably going to blame the tooling behind your demo failing, right? And so us ensuring that this was really stable from the very beginning, I think that was one of the biggest things as far as one of the things that went well for this to take off and really create that, again, that culture of other people consuming the automation and contributing back to it.
Well, and they have to trust the tools, and if you invest in the tooling such that to the extent that you did, that people just were able to rely on it, that builds trust. That's what we mean when we talk about tooling enabling culture. We talk about tooling being such a small part of the DevOps transformation, and really the cultural aspects being, the much larger, much more difficult things to solve. But you can start with tooling, and it can build trust and help bridge these teams together.
I think very, very much trailing on that point is when Andre and I were doing this, a lot of this was, we had a semi-official charter to help make these things easier. But this was largely, it started off as kind of a little bit of a skunkworks project. And so that kind of, that initiative to where we saw this need across several teams. And we also, as Andre, pointed out, creating that trust across those teams, and making sure that you already had the answers for them to their questions. I remember sitting down with one of our training folks at ChefConf, and they had seen the demo, and they're like, "Oh, I want to use all this," and they were asking me, "Does it support this?" And I was like, "Yes, it supports it." And they were both pleasantly surprised that I had built something for them, and were kind of, "Well, how did you see this?" And it was just kind of looking across the company and, seeing, is there a big unsolved need that we're all kind of missing as we're in our silos? And that's, that is to say, you can always be better about popping out of your silo. And for us, that was big because we got a lot more insight into how these products were being developed, a lot more feedback back into the product development lifecycle, where we were finding things that were hard to do in Wombat. And we said, hey, can we make this just easier at the product level? And so a lot of features, a lot of interesting new bugs that we didn't even know we'd had because we hadn't done this testing. Those were all kind of sussed out. So there's a lot of value in dog fooding your entire stack, and even the frameworks. So when we build a framework on top of Wombat, those frameworks are actually tested and built with Wombat. So it is very much. I mean, it is. There's very clear like dog fooding from the ground up, which we wanted to actually use this to increase the trust in those tools, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't emphasize the importance of that enough. And you talked about it being a skunkworks project, so that's kind of an interesting topic because, we want to be transparent, we want to build things and be open source, but you almost had to go in that man cave and work this out, a little bit to prove the value to yourself, and then you knew it had value, and then, open the floodgates. And everybody wanted it because it was so well thought through. So thanks again for putting such heart and effort into it. And, the point with all of this here is, again, we're just human here at Chef, and I think a lot of our customers are facing similar challenges. And, we were able to work this through and solve it, and it ended up, just a really awesome project. And so we're hoping this inspires you to feel that you can also tackle these challenges, and, you can do this too. So with that, I am curious now, what is next? What is next for Wombat? Where's the project, and where do you see it going here in the future? What's next?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on Wombat today. That is part of my charter today is to actually build some features for training, which is fantastic because that means that's one other group that has gotten on. I think one of the best stories I forgot for the retrospective was several weeks later after ChefConf, I was on an all hands demo call, and so somebody engineering showing off a new thing. And the fantastic thing was I actually saw somebody using Wombat, and I had never talked to them. They hadn't contacted me directly or weren't part of the early development. It was just someone else in the engineering org had seen someone else using Wombat and then used it to show off their really cool project because it solved a lot of needs for them. And for us, that kind of hit the nail on what we wanted for Wombat's future, which was this is a continued movement to, we were calling it a library model, but the idea that Wombat is not something that necessarily does builds these stacks for you, but it is a framework that can build these stacks and you can flavor them yourself. So the best example that we kind of alluded to already was the solutions architecture group at Chef. They are currently building a project, and it is being used for our demos for our solutions architecture group. And they have this project. It will build. It's in CI. It uses Chef Automate. It uses kind of dog foods itself, and this produces nice demos. And then they have content that goes along with these demos. It's all versioned. You can know exactly what you're deploying at any given time. We're going to see this with training. We're going to see more partners. We're going to, if anyone's at Summit next week, we will be there to talk about Wombat. We're also going to have we're going to be opening both Wombat and some other projects related to it up to partners. Like I mentioned, Wombat is already open source, but there's some other projects that we want to share with partners to kind of get them going and say, this is all, this is great. What we need is a lot of feedback. That's what we really want. Right now, Wombat's a fairly small audience. It's mostly internal to chefs. We have a good idea of what we're building, but getting that kind of feedback and seeing what people want and making sure, again, that we're not building something that already exists. For us, ideally, all of the products would be so easy to install that Wombat would, kind of fizzle away to just be, say a CloudFormation template or a, Google Deployment Manager template. And so that's kind of really for us is driving all those little bugs we find or improvements all the way back up into the products. And then I guess the kind of final goal, which kind of sums all that up, is we were having a team meeting, and one of our higher ups actually had seen Wombat and said, "I would love to see this be how we integration test all of the Chef products." So just every day, all the new builds that are cut, every time something's released, it'll just pass through this kind of Wombat matrix, run a test, make sure everything not just installs correctly in its own, but also is verified. And it's also verified that it's working with all of the other components, because that's something that would solve a lot of problems and just reduce those kinds of release headaches that everyone knows, when you're releasing multiple products that may or may not play nicely with each other. And so that for us is kind of the ideal, the shining future goal. And so hopefully we'll get there someday.
Yeah, and I would say another thing as far as the future is really nailing in that testing idea, right? So right now, we really intended Wombat as being, people who have been using Chef for a little while, you kind of building a best practice kind of a group of Chef cookbooks that could be repeatedly used, but then also we want to add in like inspect tests, right, and like other pieces of the ecosystem. And then also making it to where the individual components, right, so Wombat itself is really great for building static images, but I think myself and Seth, we've gotten a lot of feedback recently as people want to use this for other things that don't really fit with that static image model. Well, those cookbooks that we built for it, they're still repeatedly used in other methods as well, right? So I think as far as the future goes, there's definitely a few things that could be taken from Wombat and used into other things that I can definitely see is happening.
Very cool. Well, we are starting to have some questions from the audience. We just have a couple more things to cover, and then we'll get straight to a Q&A. But please submit your questions now if you have them. We will respond to everything as we've got the full hour to do so. So with that in mind, let's kind of wrap things up and take you through some resources that we'd like you to consider. So as we think about everything we've heard today, how we really dog food everything here at Chef, we wanted to share what we learned from trying to set up this common framework, and we're really hoping that folks will consider open sourcing their own projects, Chef projects, any of your projects, even if it's just internally. It really makes your own projects more awesome, and that's what we want to do, is make more awesome. We hope that you'll give Chef Automate a try, chef.io/automate. You can spin up an instance at your favorite cloud provider and really experience this value for yourself. There's a 30-day free trial, and would love to see how you get started with Chef Automate. I have included a link to the Wombat repo, and I'll ask Seth and Andre to kind of give guidelines for, take a look at that. To be clear, this is, an example that was specifically designed for our use case. So Seth and Andre, could you just chat how you want folks to interact with the repo?
Yeah, so I would say Wombat is very, very much, I would still consider it maybe beta code. It certainly has worked for a keynote. At the same time, there's kind of no warranty implied. This lives under the Chef customer-facing teams repo, but that was largely so we could collaborate. But it is very much an open source project and not something that we're working on all the time. So we definitely don't intend it to. This is not a production use kind of framework. Right now, we're not doing, we have very, very simple security group setups and things like that for each of the clouds. And also kind of to answer one of the first questions, we also only have support for the varying clouds in order of completeness is Amazon being the most complete, because that's what we built the demo for, and that's what we're using internally at Chef at the time. After that, Google Cloud works about 90% of the way. And then Azure, we have some templated support in there, but we haven't built a full entire working stack on Azure to date. So that kind of, just to kind of give, knowing both the maturity and kind of where it's at, we encourage feedback, but it will be, if you're not comfortable with Ruby, then just kind of let us know where the UX breaks. Because that's where really what we're interested in, making this simpler. So anything that's, if you don't feel you can contribute to code, anything that can help us make it work better or make it work for you, we're kind of encouraging all input at this point, but also with the understanding that we may not use all of that.
Well, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, so please take a look at it. Welcome your feedback. Your mileage may vary. Specific use case it was built in mind for, but I appreciate again very much you sharing that with the world. So thank you so much, guys. And last, I want to just call out too. Make sure you visit learn.chef.io. You can contact myself or Andre or Seth. If you have questions that we can answer specifically, we or still have time for some questions. So please place your questions in the Bright Talk questions Q&A section, and we'll stay on and take a look at that. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up for questions.
So I do see the first question there. So can I use Wombat to build my Chef Automate stack on premises? Currently, no. Wombat is very much geared around a Packer workflow, so it's building images for either clouds or local development via Vagrant. That said, all of the cookbooks that are part of Wombat are all generally useful. And I say this just because when we switched from AWS to some of the Google Cloud development, for example, all the cookbooks just worked right away. Granted, we're using same operating systems and things, but it was very satisfying to be able to make that switch very easily. So those cookbooks are generally useful. Limitations on use cases, like I said, it's around production grade stuff. We don't have, like I said, the security groups are fairly simple. They're presuming a demo. They're presuming that you're going to kill this, maybe after a few days. Usually for us, it's, a few hours, just because we're, like I said, spinning up a demo. So we have, internally, we use TTLs on all of our stacks. So after a certain amount of time, they will be reaped automatically. You can use real keys, which is nice. So if you have real SSH keys and real certificates for the hosts, you can plug in your own domain names and things. While that is there, like I said, we haven't made it fully production grade. One of our, future goals, and it's been brought up internally at least, is to have a stack where Wombat can basically be flipped from this is demo mode and kind of you flip a switch, run a rake command or something, and then it will make it production ready. That's it's definitely a pie in the sky goal because there are a lot of considerations and a lot of, what works for you. The reason we're focused specifically on clouds is because these are reproducible environments for everyone. So we can, if we give it to you in Azure, you could basically use some of the programs that the clouds have, like Push to Pilot and Cloud Try and things like that. And those are all kind of heavily image-based. So that's kind of where we want to stick with Wombat for now. But if it does open up to on-prem, we're happy to see it. But we believe that will be solved by Automate documentation mostly. But good question.
Really good question. And for the submitter of that, we hope that that helps clarify for you. But if you have a follow-on, again, just type it into the spot there. And we do have still about 12 minutes, so let us know. It was a really fun project to work on, and so we're excited to share it with you. So Andre, do you let's take through and go with some quick takeaways or last things to share for attendees. Andre, may I start with you? Any closing thoughts?
I believe Andre's having audio issues. He's saying the audio is currently down for him.
Okay. Well, Seth, would you take us through any takeaways, closeouts?
So I'm getting feedback in the presenter chat that folks can't hear anything.
Okay, we're going to pause until we sort the audio. Stand by a moment, please, if y'all can hear it.
Oh, okay, good. It looks like it's audience side, but some of the presenters, the phone they have on the presentation side. So it looks like we're still on. So with that, I guess we can, if anyone has any more questions, Jessica said, we'll be hanging around. So if you do have further questions after that, please feel free to reach out to us on the GitHub repo or via email. I believe that's provided at the end of the presentation. We're fairly easy to find at Chef. And Jessica, do you have any closing words before we move on?
Just appreciate the time today. I know it's tough to break away from work, and so appreciate everyone for dialing in today and for those able to listen to it on the recording. Just to touch back to contacting us further, I'm Uber Geek Girl on Twitter. Seth, you are Cheese Plus on Twitter, and Andre is Use Automation. So feel free to connect with us there. We'd love to continue the dialogue. Our emails are pretty straightforward as well. I should have included them, but I'm Jessica at chef.io. Seth, are you S. Thomas or Seth at chef.io?
I unfortunately, we actually have multiple Seths, which is a new problem, so I am S. Thomas at chef.io.
S. Thomas at chef.io. Excellent. Andre, remind me your email address. Let's see. I should have that. Andre. Yeah, Elizondo at chef.io. AELIZONDO at chef.io. And the last comment I want to make is you mentioned Chef Summit in Seattle, which is next week. I'm very excited to be there. I hope we'll see some of the folks that joined today. Please join us next week in Seattle if you are able. We've got a full week of various activities. The summit itself is on Wednesday and Thursday. We do have a habitat hack day on Tuesday. And as well, to close the week, we do have a hack day, a general hack day. Anything you want to hack on, the Chef, Azure, any of these things, that will be on Friday. So hope to see you all there. And Jamie, do you know if we still have a discount available, a discount code, Chef Friends? We'll see if we have a discount code for folks. I do see a question from the audience. Let's see if I can pull this up.
Yeah, I was going to say I can.
Yes, please, Seth, if you go ahead and take that.
The question was, does Wombat use chef provisioning? And no, Wombat does not use chef provisioning. It's the actual tool sets, because I don't think we mentioned, it's primarily Packer and then Chef for configuration, as well as, and then we just use a CloudFormation template for at least AWS. And the idea with those templates is that this is part of the 5 minutes to get going. We did look at frameworks like Chef Provisioning and Terraform and things, but for us, it was about avoiding that runtime configuration. So we definitely avoided using that, although there is some code in the repo related to Terraform as well for kind of an idea of how you would do that with a runtime framework. But currently there's no chef provisioning, and the Terraform support, just as a caveat, has not been touched in months, because it was kind of an initial pass that we put on the shelf for the that quick spin up advantage.
Well, great. Well, thanks for answering that about chef provisioning. I'm going to mark that as answered. Very good, very good. Let's see, any other questions? Someone left us 5 stars in the feedback, so thank you for that. This is a lot of fun for us, for Seth and Andre and I, to share this project. We've been living and breathing it for a number of months now. So to see it out in the world and share it with you is great for us. So thank you for taking the time. And so with that, I don't have anything else. Andre, do you have any closing thoughts if your audio is back?
Jessica, thank you so much. Thanks for covering Red. I already lost audio for a minute there. Looks like we have answered all of the questions that have come through, and we're just about at our time. So I wanted to go ahead and thank you, Jessica, Andre, and Seth, for sharing your story with us and providing the audience with this great information. And also thank you to our audience for taking time out of your day to join us. Before you go, please do take a moment to rate this presentation and leave your feedback in the Rate This tab in your viewer screen. And we also encourage you to check out the links to additional resources in the Attachments tab of your viewer. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.